Ladies, gentlemen, FSR talks. So we are going to talk. We're going to talk about a very interesting topic. Electricity market design. Is the existing electricity market design, the one we practice in North America, Europe, Australia, is this market design, while experienced since years, fit for the energy crisis? I know this energy crisis is mainly European, but we are European too. So to discuss it, we need a real expert, and we got one. A guy knowing very well the theory, even better than me, but also being familiar with the practice, because market design is something we work with. And this guy is Thomas-Olivier Léautier. He made his PhD at MIT in the US. Then he worked from the world consultancy McKinsey. Then he came back to academia at Toulouse Schools of Economics. You may know that the famous international school in France, from France, but truly international, led by the Nobel Prize winner Jean Tirole. And then Thomas decided to run the management academic at the leading French utility EDF. And recently, this year, he became chief economist at Total. Total is a three-leg energy company with oil, gas, and renewables, or if you prefer, two-leg and wings. So it's very interesting to hear from Thomas. In private life, we call it Thomas, we call him Thomas, but openly Thomas-Olivier. And Thomas released a book roughly on the topic a few years ago. We have invited him already at FSR Talk for 45 minutes discussing the book. He wrote a chapter with Paul Joscao in the handbook we published with Paul a few months ago. So he's really the guy. Thomas-Olivier, you have the floor. After the floor, I will ask you one question, a few questions from my deputy for European Affairs, Nicolò, non-European Affairs, Swetha, and then to the entire audience. And if Lynn Kisling is there, Lynn told me it will be very early, but I will attend. If you are there, Lynn, I will give you also the floor. Thomas-Olivier, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jean-Michel, for these kind words of introduction. I don't know if you can live up to the expectation, but thank you in any way for your kind words. Jean-Michel and I have been knowing each other for many, many years and working on different projects. And it has been a pleasure. It is a pleasure for me to be at FSR today. I think it's one of the leading institutions in Europe in terms of disseminating and building knowledge about regulation. And the purpose of FSR, which I think will resonate with today's talk, is that we need to bring together the world of economics, economic research, economic thinking, and the world of policy and decision making. It is particularly true in electricity market, but it's true in the broader disciplines, in the broader markets, in the broader interactions that we have, and the different fields. Let me just introduce the discussion of today by an analogy and an example. The difficulty we have as economists, and I'm a trained economist like Jean-Michel and Nicolò and Swetha also. As economists, we think that when we have a problem, more often than not, the simplest solution is to raise the price of the good, and that somehow that will balance supply and demand, and that will work out. That's our go-to solution. Put a price on something and somehow it will solve problems. Policymakers think completely differently. They think in terms of social outcomes, they think in terms of voting, they think in terms of coalition. They have a different frame of mind. When we as economists think about a problem, the lens by which we analyze the problem is efficiency. We want to get the thing done at the cheapest possible cost. We want to get the most effective outcome. We really want to be efficient and effective. That's the way we measure the solution we propose, and that's the way we think. As a policymaker, efficiency and effectiveness is one important dimension, but it's not the only one. You also think again about the broader social context, construct. You think about people's aspiration. You think about their souls as well as their wallet. We're really in the wallet business as economists, and as policymakers, you're also in heart and souls business. And a little example will bring that point home, and then we can talk about power markets. It's an example I actually got from Michel Le Breton, who is a great economic researcher at the Toulouse School of Economics. And when he told me that story, I thought it was really helpful, and I hope it will be the same for you. So Michel told me about this bridge. He says you build a bridge between point A and point B, and you want to pay the bridge with a toll. So when people cross the bridge, they have to pay you for something to cross the bridge. So the first guy who comes, he just comes. He wants to cross the bridge to go to the other side of the bridge. He's not in a particular hurry. He's not really interested in. He wants to cross, but it's not a big deal for him if he doesn't cross or if he crosses later. And then you have another person that comes, and she's a lady, and she carries her child in her arms, and the child is really sick, is feverish, is really sick, and the hospital is on the other side of the bridge, and the question is, and she really, really wants to cross because she wants to go to the hospital and get the child to the hospital. She wants to cross the bridge to get to the hospital. And then the question is, who should pay more? Should it be the man who just wants to cross to visit a friend, or should it be the lady who has the child in her arms and wants to save her child by going to the hospital? Now, as anybody, as a normal person, you'd say, well, we should get the lady to cross because it's really important, because she has a dire need of crossing the bridge. And it's really important if she does, and she needs to get her kid to the hospital. As an economist, you're going to say, well, really the person who has the highest willingness to pay is that woman, because she does have a high willingness to pay. Therefore, she should pay more, because she will pay, she will cross the bridge, she will use the infrastructure. So she should pay more than the other guy who may or may not use the bridge. And that's, in a nutshell, the tension in economics. As economists, we say we have a problem, we raise the price because that's the efficient thing to do. As people and as politicians, as citizens, we have a different view of the world. And that analogy, I think, applies perfectly well to power markets. As economists, we say, look, at the end of the day, there's a price for power at every hour. This price is extremely volatile because it depends on the conditions on the system. It depends on the demand, it depends on the supply. It depends on fuel prices, it depends on wind patterns, it depends whether it's hot or cold. It's a variety of reasons. So this price is very volatile. It is essentially the marginal cost of the last megawatt hour produced in most of the time. And if we want the system to be efficient, that is, if we want people to make the right decisions at every point in time, we need to have the price reflect the marginal cost, actually price be the marginal cost. And that's how we set up our markets, by having price be the marginal cost, and that gives production and consumption decision. And then we say, if for long periods of time, the prices are very high, then producers, investors will see that prices are high, and therefore they'll build more capacity. And by building more capacity, they will increase the supply. And if demand doesn't grow faster, the prices will come down and the market will balance itself. And then we say, if there are regions where production is very expensive compared to region where production is not as expensive, and somehow the market are not perfectly connected, we should let the price be different from point A to point B to reflect the local market condition. And because that is what is efficient. The price is more expensive in point A than point B, then customers will not locate in point A because they'll know that it will cost more. And that's how we think about markets, power markets as economists. Let the price decide the short-term consumption and production decision. Let the price vary across time and vary across location. and that will drive the right outcome. Now, of course, that economist view is really hard to put in practice, and politicians and citizens do not react kindly to that view of the world. So, for example, when the gas price went up, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples and then I can take questions. When the gas price went up in the fall of 2021 in Europe, so the gas price went up because gas is at the margin in most European countries. The power price went up and people saw their bill rise dramatically. Now, as an economist, you sit there and you say, well, look, gas price goes up, power price goes up. Two things are going to happen. First, people are going to reduce their consumption. So in Europe, power consumption is in the winter driven, at least in part, by heating, because we have a lot of electric heating, at least in France. So people will put on a sweater and consume less electricity, which is good because electricity at this point is very expensive. So people will consume a bit less. And because gas prices are so expensive and power prices are so expensive, then people will invest in energy saving technology. They will invest in renewable electricity generation technology because they will see that the economic space for renewable technology has gone up. And we should see an acceleration in the deployment of wind turbines and solar panels. So as an economist, you say, prices are high. This is good as an economic signal. And you also say prices are high. They will hurt let's say, the bottom quartile of the income distribution. And the appropriate policy answer is targeted support to the bottom quartile of the income distribution, to the people at the bottom quartile of the distribution, because they will be the one who bear the brunt of what happens. So again, as an economist, high prices, let them prices be high, that give the right signal, but give targeted support to the bottom quartile of the income distribution. Of course, politicians don't do that. They cap the prices in France, but in most countries, they cap the prices for everybody, which is very inefficient because it doesn't have the impact of reducing consumption. And then they redistribute and find money to redistribute. So again, but why do they do that? They do that because people think that high power prices are unfair and that haven't done anything that justify prices being high. So that's one example. The second example is about spatial price differentiation. In Germany, you have a lot of wind power in the north of Germany, and you have a lot of demand in the south of Germany. So in reality, the price of power is much, much cheaper in the north of Germany when you are very close to the wind turbines than in the south of Germany. But Germany says we don't want to have multiple power prices in our country. We don't want to be divided again. It's a very strong thing in Germany. I'm not German, so I cannot comment on that, but it's certainly very strong in Germany. So the price of power is the same in the northern part and the southern part of Germany. So if you are an industry and you're looking for a location to locate your factory, to locate your power consuming car factory or whatever, you will not know that it's better to get yourself in the north of Germany when power is more expensive, where power is cheaper. That's where you should locate. But you don't see that because you pay the same price in the north and in the south. So you're going to locate in the south, which is going to add to the problem and make price in the south more expensive, and which is going to create additional congestion. So again, you have this tension between what is economically efficient and what is politically acceptable. And that's why when I wrote my textbook that Jean-Michel mentioned about power markets, and the way I titled the book is, microeconomics versus political economy, because I think that those two forces are present very clearly in the power markets. You could make the case they are present in other dimensions of the economy, in health, in lots of different dimensions, but it's particularly relevant also in power markets. Jean-Michel, I think time for your question.
Okay, very elementary question. So you insisted on political economy, and I will not. I will discuss something else. May we think that microeconomics are changing in the electricity sector? For example, we have the new technologies, wind, solar, or they are said mainly zero marginal cost, so they should push the markets in different directions, or the investors in different directions. Second, consumers are differentiating. For example, a part of the consumers are prosumers. They produce themselves, but they produce with assets already invested. So their assets are there. They are going to use it in different ways maybe that's the market equilibrium. Maybe we can think the same for companies having signed power purchase agreements with renewable producers. And third, policy priorities are changing because many governments are willing to get decarbonization instead of energy. So may we think that these new forces, are changing the way markets work or not?
That's an excellent question, and I'm going to give you my view, and of course, it is just one person view, and it should be challenged, and feel free to disagree. And I know actually, Jean-Michel, you will feel free to disagree. In my view, the principles of microeconomics, it's a bit like gravity. It always wins. So at the end of the day, at every point in time, at every location, there's a marginal cost of producing electricity. It's there. It's like gravity. Whether you use it or not to make your decision, it's your choice. But the cost of producing the last megawatt hour is here. And whether we have renewables or non-renewables, whether we have PPAs or no PPAs, whether we have decarbonization agenda or not, microeconomics is always there. The question is how much we as society how much weight we put on microeconomics when we design our electricity markets, and how much weight do we put on other dimensions and objectives. So when I was writing my PhD thesis in North America in 1995, at the time, most of the weight put, when market design was being designed in the United States, most of the weight was put on microeconomics. The debates that were at the time were really microeconomics. It was about whether we needed to have a short, how we make sure the short-term market term is liquid. Do we need to have a power exchange and a system operator? Those were really microeconomics-driven discussions and debate. As you correctly point out, Jean-Michel, today the debate is broader than microeconomics. It has also a dimension of decarbonization, reducing CO2 emissions. It also has, and the reality that the war in Ukraine brings that in a grim way to the forefront of our concerns, in a tragic way to the forefront of our concerns. But the security of supply, that is making sure we have enough petajoules in the long term to meet our energy demand, that has become also now a new concern for policymakers. So today, policymakers are balancing these different concerns, and the choices that they will make will reflect a greater balance from this concern. But having said that, I do not think that microeconomics of power markets are changing at all. I think it's more the way we use them. And I'm going to give you an example, which I found out about recently, which I found absolutely staggering. So we're looking at the UK power market, and when you asked for projections on the future of the UK power market, and at Total Energy, we worked with a consultant. I'm not going to give names, not to make publicity, but a very good consultant who does a lot of power price modeling and forward price modeling and so on and so forth. So they have this model of the UK, and I talked to them quite a bit to understand how their model works, and it's very robust. It's a very good quality. So they say today the UK is essentially a gas-fired power market. So most of the time, gas is at the margin and sets the price. Over the next 20 years, we're going to see a lot of wind turbines entry into the UK power market. So people will say, well, it's going to change the world dramatically. Well, yes and no. The microeconomics are still going to work, as I'm going to show you. So what's going to happen is you have all those zero price hours in the UK power market because it's wind producing and a lot of hours there's more wind than demand, so the price is set at zero. Wind is at the margin. What they're going to do at the time, because there are zero price hours, you're going to see a lot of electrolyzers entering the UK market to produce green hydrogen. And those electrolyzers are going to sometimes get the price at zero, but when they're going to be enough of them, they're going to have to compete for the price, and they're going to raise the price above zero to whatever is their break-even point. And that consulting firm says, it's going to be about 30 pounds per megawatt hour. Be that as in, I don't know if the number is right or wrong, but what I'm saying is that when you look at the supply, at the price duration curve for the UK in 2050, it does feel a bit like the one we're used to, except that demand is going to be setting the price for a great many number of hours. So it's the same principle of microeconomics that apply. It's the same logic, it's the same equations, but they apply to a different system. Now, having said that, and Jean-Michel is absolutely right, we're going to have new technologies, we're going to have new priorities, and maybe the way we set up our markets are going to be different. But at the end of the day, the same principles are going to apply. There are going to be a price which is going to be set either at the marginal cost or the marginal value, and that's the way it is.
Many thanks, Thomas-Olivier. An excellent discussion. Unfortunately, I will stop because I would also have loved discussing with you carbon price and also Christian Gaulier. I have excellent relations with Christian, but I'm not the only guy here. I have two discussants, Nicolò and Swetha. Gender balance, we said Swetha first, but as she is non-European, I will nevertheless pick Nicolò being European. Nicolò, you have the floor by exception, because politeness would have been Swetha.
A legacy of imperialism, maybe, but thank you, Jean-Michel, and thank you, Thomas-Olivier, for being with us. Well, I read a couple of book chapters that you wrote in the recent past, Thomas, and I tried to find questions that were fitting the topic of today. And actually, I came with two. I will start with the first, then we'll see if also the second is needed. So, as you also said today, you strongly believe in the idea that spot markets for electricity with forward markets, complemented by forward markets, can provide us this good macroeconomics for electricity, could provide an efficient allocation of resources. You justify this, saying that, of course, if prices are free to adjust to reflect the scarcity of generation or the value expressed by demand at a certain moment, then market players will react and will basically adopt optimal dispatch and investment decisions. In the long term, this will lead towards an efficient equilibrium, towards an efficient allocation of the resources in the electricity system. However, in the past few years, we observed that the introduction of competitive wholesale markets in electricity has been rarely matched by an adequate entry of new merchant-based generation capacity. I would like to highlight this merchant-based generation capacity. And sometimes even now that we are experiencing this electricity crisis in Europe, this energy crisis in Europe, some people argue that the responsibility is for illiquid forward markets, for not having adequate forward markets in place. I would like to know if you agree with this argument, and if you do, if you have any suggestion, any recommendation to improve the market design in place in Europe. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and there are two levels of answers. The first one is, and I'm going to start by the simplest one. One of the most striking features of commodity markets, and I mean, I've been in the power business for many years. I've been for a few weeks back into the oil and gas business, and at some point I was in the aluminum business. I was working with Alcan. One of the most striking features of all those commodities is that everybody would like to have long-term contracts, but in fact, there are very few long-term contracts. In alumina, we were, when I was at Alcan, we were having very long-term contracts with aluminum users. Some of them were auto manufacturers, some of them are bottlers for Coca-Cola and Pepsi, some of them were working in the airspace industry, the aviation industry. So we had very long-term contracts in terms of delivery of tons of aluminum, but they would never agree to fix a price for more than 5 years in advance. So there is something where buyers and sellers naturally do not want to fix a price for many years. And that is what is called a missing market. Somehow the industry is not used to that. And there could be, and there is an argument that I think is reasonably valid that says, look, somehow the market doesn't get to create those long-term contracts. We as a policymaking body, think that these contracts will be an efficient risk-sharing, long-term risk-sharing arrangements between different parties, and we want to step in and offer long-term contracts. And that is a valid concern. You could discuss what is the shape of those contracts. Should they be contract for differences? Should they be options? There's a lot of discussion. Who should be the parties and so on and so forth. But there is a valid concern that the market forces per se are not providing enough long-term contracts to sustain investment and to de-risk investment in the power industry. So that's one point. And I think there's a valid case to be made that we should have more long-term contracts. The second point, which is about generation capacity and investment, is really about who is responsible for investment in generation. And there are broadly two schools of thoughts, and they cannot compete. The microeconomics tell you should have the price go up for a certain number of hours during the year, the price going up being set by the willingness to pay of consumers. And that high prices will give the signal for investment. But you need to let market forces play themselves. And if they do, then you'll see investment, and you won't see perfect investment because long-term markets are never perfect. Sometimes people invest too much, sometimes people invest too early, sometimes they invest too late, sometimes they invest too little. But you'll see some investment, and somehow over the long term and on average, markets will balance themselves. So that's word A. Word B, which is the world we live in, is that the government says, no, I don't want that. I want to fix a generation adequacy standard, and I want to fix as a target the number of gigawatts of installed capacity in the market. And when they do that, typically they choose more capacity than what is economically feasible. And therefore, investors, when they look at the targets required by the government, they say, we do not make enough money. If we were to build those assets to get you to the capacity you want, those assets by construction will be in overcapacity. Therefore, those assets will be non-profitable, so we're not going to build them. And that explains why you don't see a lot of merchant investment, because everybody knows the government wants too much. So because the government fixes an objective of having too much capacity compared to what is the economic optimum, and that's a very important point, compared to what is the economic optimum, you don't see investment, and therefore you create capacity markets. And then with capacity markets and the target given by the government, you see merchant investment, as in non-regulated investment, that takes place, but very limited, because people say, look, maybe the government is going to change the rule on capacity markets, maybe they are not going to hold forever, and so on and so forth. So I would contend that what you see, the scarcity of merchant investment, which is, by the way, not always true. I was in the United States in the late 1990s. There was a lot of merchant investment. In Europe, in the late 2000s, there was a lot of merchant investment. But I would contend that, because the government is mandating capacity targets that are in excess of what is economically feasible, it's very difficult to justify merchant investment. It's more complicated, it's more risky, even with a capacity market. The final point on that, as I said, there's a target that's fixed by the government, and there's what is economically optimal. And again, we get back to the discussion I highlighted at the beginning. As an economist, I say, look, for me, the optimum is whatever the market will provide. As the government, you may say, no, I don't find that sufficient, and I want more than what the market can provide. And therefore, I fix another target. And that is true for electricity, but that is also true for a lot of other goods and services we have in the economy. I'm pretty sure that if we let the market provide healthcare and health services, we'll have less healthcare and health services than the society wants. And that's why you have government intervention in providing healthcare and health services. And there are lots of other examples where the market outcome is not satisfactory, and the society says, look, that's not sufficient, we want more, and therefore we have government intervention. My only observation is that if you do that in the power market, you cannot expect to have merchant investment and government mandated targets. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, the idea is that basically it's too risky, there are too many uncertainties, and actually the political sensitiveness of the electricity business is part of the reason why investors do not invest enough in electricity generation, and at the same time, some buyers would prefer to be able to buy electricity later, probably at a lower price, if I understood it correctly. But still, do you have any suggestion on how something maybe incremental could be done in this regard to maybe at least promote a bit the development of forward market, maybe not 10 years, 15 years, but something more than the 2-3 years that we often observe in electricity, or any concrete suggestion?
I think it's really hard. I mean, we make two answers. There are two dimensions to that story. The first one is sort of the abstract construct of how do we promote long-term investment, long-term contracting, and if there's none, that happens. It's very difficult for the government to do that. I think it's one of the 0-1 problems. Either you don't do anything, or the government sets in and says, I'm going to buy power long-term. It's not the government. I mean, it could be the regulator, the market operator. It's not necessarily the government. But at the end of the day, it's a governmental body that just goes and buy the power long-term, and then resells it in some way, shape, or form to the customers. So I don't think there's some sort of mid possibility in between. I don't know that there's some inducement you can give to people short of buying the power yourself. What I've seen done that works for the short term in countries like New Zealand, which they haven't done in Europe, which is to make sure that the suppliers, the retailers, the guy who actually retail power to people, that they have purchased a significant share of their power in advance. So in the New Zealand regulator, they ask the retailers, this is how much many clients you have, this is how much demand you have, how much power have you purchased to meet your demand, and is your hedging ratio adequate over the next year or 2 years? So then the government can induce contracting, but you can go 2 or 3 years. You cannot go further than that, because that would be counterproductive, because retailers will tell you, I don't know how many clients I will have 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So you can do things short term, but long term, I think you have to buy. Now, the other aspect, which is very important, which is coming, and somehow unfortunately coming, is an argument about security of supply. For most of our lives, we've lived in a world where, in a way, trade is in, and we don't worry about security of supply, because we think that if we buy something from another country, that country will always selling to us because it'll be beneficial to them. So we have not been concerned about where the goods we produce and the goods we consume, or exactly where the goods we consume come from. We just bought them from outside. That's the great trade wave, and we have many of them in our history. The last one started roughly in the late 90s and has extended up until 2-3 years ago. So security of supply was not a concern. We don't have energy. We'll buy gas from Russia. We'll buy gas from Qatar. We'll buy solar panels from China, and it would be fine because that's more efficient. That's cheaper to do it that way. There was a great famous book by Francis Fukuyama called The End of History, and we've lived that period of the end of history. Now, for the last 2 to 3 years, and certainly for the few years coming, we're going back to a world, and that's very unfortunate. We're going back to a world where trade is going to be less important, and we're going to have regional blocks that are going to try to be self-sufficient as much as possible, or at least will try to keep their hands on some vital assets. And somehow, the commanding heights of the economy, I'm using the title of a great book by Daniel Yergin, the commanding heights of the economy will again be local, which means that government will say, I want to have electrolyzers in Europe, and I want to have them located in Europe, and I don't want to buy hydrogen from other countries. That's what the French government said, I want to have nuclear power plants in France, because I want to be owning the value chain. I want to be owning the machines that produce electricity in France using French input. I don't want to have to go and buy fuel or other energy sources from outside. So you have this return to self-sufficiency. And in that context, I suspect you'll see a lot more forward contracting by government agents and agencies to foster and accelerate the development of those technologies for one simple reason, is that they may not always be the most economic, but they will meet another goal, which is strategic security of supply, and somehow the market will not provide for that. And you'll have to go into long-term government contracting to get them going. So that would be my long-winded answer to your question. So if I had a suggestion, would be we have to be willing to accept long-term contracting, because some of the objectives that we face today go beyond short-term market efficiency. It's really about the strategic aspect. Now, when you open that box, and that was my final point, when you open the Pandora's box of long-term government contracting, you get everything. You get the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because, then all of a sudden, it's no longer efficient. So which technology gets picked, which gets the contract, where, when, it becomes a political bargaining game. And as an economist, we do not like that. But as citizens, we have to understand it's also necessary for our long-term goals.
Thank you. Do we go to Swetha?
Yes, I would say that I'm very satisfied.
So Swetha is another deputy at France School, but in charge of non-European affairs, because we are a world school. Swetha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Thomas, for this lovely talk so far. So I have a couple of questions, one linked to something that you've already been discussing, and two linked to Total. So my first question is, in the recent years, we see a sort of democratization of the electricity grid, with end users having the possibility of being prosumers, prosumagers, or the development of mini grids, or even organizing oneself as local energy communities. Do you see this trend challenging the existing electricity markets? If yes, how? And how should we prepare ourselves?
No, I don't. I think actually it's great news for electricity markets, because it will increase demand response. Now, there are some real issues around information transit, and how do they get the information, how they can react to it. But assuming those issues get sorted out, I think it's great, because we're going to have a lot of demand response in the market, and that's going to make the markets more efficient. So that's great. That's one. And second point, I think it's terrific that citizens have their say and have a touch and feel electricity, and have a say in the decisions around electricity, as opposed to just flicking up and down the switch. So I think it's great, and I think it's going to create new business models, and it's great for everyone, for the citizens involved, and it's great for the markets, because it's going to make them more efficient. So I think it's terrific.
Thank you. So probably moving forward to my next question. We see that Total Energies is diversifying its business portfolio, moving away from oil and gas. And we did note that in the recent years, you all have heavily invested in renewables, retail, aggregation, and so on. Could you tell us a bit more on this regard? So what are your focus regions and what particular technologies would you be focusing on in different parts of the world?
I just joined Total Energies, so I don't feel I can, yet know enough about the energy and the strategy and to be a spokesperson for the company. The only thing I can tell you, which I think is important, is that as a company, the oil companies, historically, they always look at their long-term reserves. Anybody who has worked in the oil business knows that, that you produce oil today, and your biggest concern is where your reserves going to come from. And you look at your reserve 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, and you already build a reserve portfolio. And the folks at Total Energy, before I joined, it was long before, they just say, look, it doesn't really make sense for us to have oil reserve in 2060, because what are we going to do with that, right? It's very unlikely, if we're serious about climate change, it's very unlikely that even if we get the best reserves in 2060, it's very unlikely we're going to do much with that. So the true reserve in 2060 are going to be electricity. And they took that very seriously, and they said, look, first of all, we're not going to call ourselves Total anymore. We're going to call ourselves Total Energy, which recognize that we're a different company. And we're going to go on electricity. We're going to continue to produce oil, because you cannot just stop immediately, because if you stop oil immediately, you just stop the economy. So it's not good. So we're going to reduce our oil demand and our oil production. And, as the world reduces its oil demand, Total Energy is going to reduce its oil production in the same space. And it's not, by the way, straightforward to find the slope. So we're going to do that. And in the meanwhile, we're going to invest in all the new technologies that are coming up. Electricity for sure, renewables, hydrogen, biomethane, biocarbon, biofuels, this and that. And we're going to become low carbon. And that's the strategy. We're going to move from just being an oil company to, over the course of 40, 50 years, becoming a more electricity and sustainable fuel company. And that's why they asked me to come, because I'm an electricity guy, and I say, we need to get some experts that know the electricity market, work with us on our stuff. So that's all I can tell you about Total Energy so far, which is what I've been experiencing for the past few months. And I don't know much about the details of where I want to go and exactly those details.
Thank you, Thomas. On that note, since you mentioned the decarbonization, I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
So, of course, on the growing consensus that to decarbonize efficiently our energy systems, we need to sort of promote sector coupling or sector integration. So do you think that energy companies will play an important role in this regard? For example, probably stop selling kilowatt hour and start selling energy as a service? What do you think about this?
Yeah, that's a good one. The first thing, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that, the first priority, if you want to decarbonize the energy sector, is to put a carbon price. The rest is just irrelevant. You need to put a carbon price, because that will drive the millions of decisions we as individuals have to make, companies have to make to decarbonize the economy. And, since I've been at Total Energy, I've seen a few business plans coming up and so on and so forth. And it always, should we invest in H2? Should we invest in biomethane? Should we do this thing here, this thing there? And it always comes back to the same question. If we knew the carbon price, if there was a carbon price in the economy, that would push people away from carbon emitting energy sources and push them towards green, non-carbon emitting sources, you have no idea how much investment would occur, because all those business plans were just lacking a carbon price to make them viable and to really lead to investment. So the first thing to decarbonize the economy is a carbon price. And then what you can do with that carbon revenue is redistribute it to people who really need it, the bottom quartile, and protect them from the bad effects, the negative effect of high carbon prices. So that's the first answer to the point about, do we need to decarbonize the economy? The second point about energy as a service, I've been in this business 30 years. When I started as a consultant, I wrote packs on we should sell energy as a service. I'm old enough. You were not born then. Jean-Michel and I were there already to have seen Enron in the glory days of Enron in 1997, 1998, going around America and talking about electricity as a service. And they're not going to sell you megawatt hours. They're going to sell you degrees of heating in your house and things like that. That they had, I'm not kidding. There are forward curves for boilers. It has never worked. I'm not saying it's not going to work. I'm not saying it's not desirable. I'm just saying I haven't seen it work. But again, I'm an old guy. Jean-Michel and I, we're old, so we tend to say, we haven't seen it work, so maybe it will never work. It may work one day, but it's a hard business to do. What people need to understand, retail power, there's not much money to be had in retail power. To gain a new retail client costs between $50 and $100 per client. Just calling him up or calling her up, say, hey, I'm Swetha, I'm from this company, this is what I want to sell to you, blee, 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 blue, $50 is gone. So because you buy a commodity, you sell a commodity, you compete with a lot of people, making up that $50 is a lot of effort. So I'm not sure much is good. I'm not sure much is going to happen on the retail front. We had hope that the internet digital offering would make it. They haven't seemed to make a dent yet. So we'll see what happens. I think I'm more hopeful about B2B. That is, you don't go to an individual, you go to a company, you go to a real estate owner, that there may be something, but we haven't seen much yet. Other questions?
Swetha?
Thank you so much. Yes, I give you back the floor, Professor.
Okay, I will pick one question from EU, one question from US. From EU, Ricard at Nord Pool. Security of supply, okay, but is it realistic to have security of supply country by country? Or is security supply a whole European issue? To you, Thomas-Olivier.
No, of course, first of all, I mourn. I want to be very clear that as a citizen of the world, I mourn. I'm saddened by the notion that we have to go back to security of supply, because I thought that the idea of having trade and buying from one another, I thought that was good, and that created a lot of benefits, although those benefits were not shared equally, and there were some issues about distribution. But I'm not saying I'm in favor of security of supply. I'm just observing that it's coming back. Now, the answer is, if the security of supply is, of course, at the European level. And that's why I think the European Union has done a fantastic job of creating integrated power market. We don't celebrate that enough, but in the course we teach at Florence School, that Jean-Michel has enabled us and allowed us to teach for many years with my colleague Fabien Roch, we show the students the map of Europe and show them how the markets have progressively integrated, and now how all the countries are contributing to one another's security of supplies, even if they don't recognize it. There's a tight integration, and the megawatt hour flow from one place to another, they don't know boundaries. So yes, security of supply is clearly at the European level and not at the country level. And I think it's, even though governments do not want to acknowledge that, I think it's done in large part already. I mean, a bit of it is done already.
That's what the Commission is supposed to say tomorrow. Huh? And Prime Minister of Belgium this morning in Financial Times was supporting this coming suggestion from Commission. Another question from the US with a bit of a surprise. It's from Tim Chitekato, the one interviewing you years ago, because Tim left France School to be researcher at MIT. And Tim is saying, okay, there is some Europeans insisting on changing power markets, but frankly, in Europe, it's a gas crisis. It's a gas price shock. So shouldn't be gas being the core of research or the core of proposals? And I have heard last week from Spanish government and a bit the French government that maybe gas can receive out of the market payment. Within the power pool, gas will get a cap, price cap, but but out of a market payment will make gas available, but not felt by power consumers. What do you think about these ideas or feelings?
I think Tim makes a very good point. A couple of observations. Oftentimes, the political process is very quick at identifying a culprit, and it's not the right culprit. For example, your team is absolutely right. It is a gas market crisis, and it's not a power market crisis. So, even though a lot of people see the increase in gas price in gas and power price, and in France in particular, where we use more power than gas, it's more the power that gets seen, but it's not a power market crisis. The example that comes to mind is the example of the Texas shutdown. I think it was last January or February, which was by and large a gas crisis. It was a gas supply crisis because pipelines and the equipment froze. And that was the problem that then led to no gas available for power, and therefore not enough power generation. Because there was not enough power generation, they couldn't warm up the gas pipes, and the gas pipes couldn't send gas, and so on. So there was a cycle that started up. But it was really a gas market problem. But then again, the Texas politician and the citizens blamed it on power because what they saw was no power. So they say it's a power market problem, when in fact it was a gas problem. And one of the challenges we face, and that's why I think the Florence School plays such an important role, one of the challenges we face is to remind policymakers, or to try to enlighten them is not necessarily the right word, but to share with them facts around what's really happening. They can choose to use them or not use them, interpret them or not interpret them. But the translation role that the France School is playing is essential, because that's what enables intelligent discussions to be heard by policymakers that go beyond what you see or don't see. So first point, yes, we often confuse one crisis for another, and thanks God we have places like the Florence School to retell the truth. The second point, there's no need to change the power market. Power market is fine. It's marginal cost pricing across Europe. There's no need to change whatever in the power market. We can decide, as I said earlier, to add long-term contracts, but you can have them leave side by side with the power market as it is. We can protect vulnerable customers. We can say, look, if you are in the bottom quartile of the income distribution, you will not be subject we will compensate you from the increase in your bill that is caused by the higher gas or power prices. But frankly, at my level of income, I'm not in the bottom quartile of the income distribution. I can afford to pay more for the power. I will not like it. I will actually dislike it. It will be a pain, but I can afford it. But a person at the bottom quartile of the distribution, he or she cannot afford it. And it's not about reforming the power market. It's about redistributing to those who really need it. And those would be the people. I say bottom quartile, you could say, no, it's not the bottom quartile, it's the bottom half, the bottom 10%. But that's where we should focus on effort, instead of talking about reforming the power market and creating some extra payment for gas and this. It just doesn't make sense. And by the way, it's super hard to do. It is super hard to do. All those outside payments that Jean-Michel talked about, doing that in practice, it's a nightmare. It takes, because which gas, where do you price it? What level? How do you make sure? How does that feed into the market prices? How does that feed into the retail price? I mean, those are nightmarish things to do. So we should stay away from them, recognize that power markets are working fine, and just give money to the people who actually need it.
Last question. Big oil and gas companies are interested with renewables, like your company, Total Energy, or in Norway, Equinor. And we have a question from Norway, Astrid. Astrid is asking, what do you believe is a business case for offshore wind development?
Look, at the end of the day, if we want to decarbonize, I think the business case is very solid. I think it's a great business case because the logic is as follows. You want to decarbonize the energy sector, you have to use more electricity. You have to use more low carbon electricity, green electricity. So that will be nuclear in the countries that like nuclear, that accept nuclear, and there will be renewables in all countries. There are two families of renewables. There are the renewables that sit on land, and there are the renewables that sit on sea. I mean, it sounds like a stupid distinction, but it's really important because land has a finite surface. So, once we've filled all the fields and all the roofs with solar panels and wind turbines, we have to go offshore. So I think offshore has the potential to be a great source of low carbon energy. Now it comes with problems. It has, you have to connect it back to the grid, and it's very technically challenging to build, and so on and so forth. But if you want to decarbonize the energy sector, if you want to really reach net zero, you'll need to have offshore wind. And if that is what is needed, somehow in way, shape, or form, people will get paid the adequate amount to do that. So I think there's a strong case for offshore wind. I think right now there's a bit of excitement around offshore wind. People are paying probably a bit too much for the rights, for the licenses. I'm not sure the offshore wind turbine building industry is mature enough, but I'm pretty sure that over the next 10 to 15 years, we'll see a lot more players, a lot more industrial companies building the turbines, and it's going to be a great business.
Hallelujah, Thomas-Olivier. Many thanks for your gentle interactions. Many thanks to the audience. We got 140 people connected. Nicolò, could you do the close-up?
Yes, we want to highlight our audience, the next events. So I ask also Chiara to share the slide with a list of events. Basically, actually, if you want to know more about gas crisis and also the security of supply issues connected to it, tomorrow we have an online event. On the contrary, if you want to continue the discussion of the reform of electricity markets in Europe, we have an FSR debate on the 30th of March, led by Andris Piebalgs. Then in April, we will have another FSR talk, again hosted by Jean-Michel. We will have two German economists, Claudia Kempfer and Franziska Holz, as guests. And Dulcis in Fundo, you have still a few days, actually until tomorrow, if you want to register to the training online that Thomas-Olivier and Fabien Roch organize the Florence School of Regulation from April to July. And with this, I think I exhausted all the things. Maybe many thanks to Chiara for the logistics, to Jean-Michel for the moderation.
And to Swetha, leading the Florence School Global from India in New Delhi.
Yes, of course.
Ciao,
have
ciao.
A good day to everybody.
Ciao tutti. E merci, Chiara.